Welcome to Unsilent with your hosts Dave and Brian. This is not another current events podcast. We're digging deeper, diagnosing, and discussing what's really going on today, how we got here, and providing observations for future generations.
Welcome to Unsilent. We're Brian and Dave, and we'd love to hear back from you. Where did we get it right? Where did we get it wrong? Where are we just spot on commentators on the future? So tell us at rumble.com. You can go to unsilentpodcast.com, the website. You can leave us messages there and just give us some feedback. Let us know. So, Brian, what's going on? What's happening in the world?
Well, I got a couple of things that just struck me as kind of not funny, but not funny, haha, but kind of funny weird, right?
Funny weird. There's a lot of these days.
For those who are listening for the first time, Dave and I are trying to explain to future generations what this moment in time is like and cover things that won't be in history books. And I thought there's a couple of things that they're just kind of headline kind of things that I saw that I think we'll do a good job of that. And we'll get into something a little more serious. But this is a tweet that some gal who's apparently a famous person, doesn't matter who it is, she put out. And here's what it says. If someone tries to rape you, that doesn't give you a right to effing murder them, although she used the whole word there. Doesn't give you the right to effing murder them. People defending that disgust me. Your life is not in danger. 99.9999% of women don't die from rape. If you kill a man in a situation, you should be charged with murder.
Okay, well, this is a stupid person. I mean,
a couple things jumped out at me there. Presumably, I don't know this. I don't know much about this person. She's apparently famous, but in some capacity, not like a movie star, nothing like that. She's an influencer, probably, or something like that.
Okay, good.
It just immediately struck me like, I'm guessing her and I would not agree ideologically and like politically and things like that, right?
I doubt it. Yeah.
But it also struck me that the party she belongs to 25 years ago, like a big part of their platform was women's rights.
Yeah.
Now it seemed like ending the patriarchy and all that stuff is kind of what's unfolded from those beginnings back then.
Sure. Yeah.
And it just kind of reminds me that any good thing that people think they're going to do, any good ideology, any good thing taken to the extreme is almost always evil.
Yeah. That is the case. And the problem is sometimes when people have won, they don't realize they've won, or they're not comfortable with winning and they want to keep fighting. But no, you already won. Shut up. Stop. Go do something else. Go.
No,
the pizza.
It's the fight that they enjoy, not the outcome that they
right.
desire.
Exactly. And so it's like you've won. Now maybe you can move on to another worthy cause, because and there's so many things in our society that are like that. If you look at I would propose that for the most part, that's the case with most of the racial discussions in America now. In terms of like when I grew up in the 60s and the 70s, when I was a little kid, there was a lot more real racism than there is today. There's always going to be some racism because, people gravitate towards people that look like them, that think like them. So and
again, taken to the extreme is always evil.
Yeah, and then take it to the extreme, and so you get to the place where so that's where you have in the 50s the whole idea of segregation, 40s and 50s segregation. This is a bad thing because of racism. Now it's because of racism we have to have segregation. We can't have any evil white people in with this group. So it's again, we've taken it to the extreme rather than take a victory lap and say, man, racism is so much better in America. It's like insanely better. Yeah, there's going to be stupid people out there, adults all the time, but
it's not socially acceptable though. I think that's the distinctive difference is there was an era where it was socially acceptable.
Right. And now
then it wasn't.
Right.
And now it's becoming socially acceptable again under a different veil. You know what I mean?
Right.
Anyhow, I saw this and just so many things jumped out at me like, okay, well, whatever happens to women's rights. And then how do you get to the point?
Hold on. You said women's what's that? what's
and then after like, how do you get to the point that you put this out? presumably you thought about it, then wrote it, then reviewed it, then hit send. There was some like places for checks and balances in there.
One would think.
How do you get to the point where you send that and just don't realize how evil that is? Anyhow, so I don't want to dwell on that too much. The other headline that jumped out at me, this one is more funny. This is a CNN headline from yesterday, as you and I are recording this. It says, for months, Trump falsely acclaimed that egg prices were tumbling. That fiction has suddenly become reality.
Either that or he was right. Yeah, right, exactly. That.
Yeah, you can't say he was right, but
No.
Anyhow, I thought that was
Talk about spin. Talk about I wonder. It makes me think that there's no self awareness on the part of a lot of these people. That
yeah. I think that one of the things that is going to be fascinating in Kenny G's time, again, looking in the year, let's say 2075, 2090, right, somewhere in there, is, I hope in their journalism courses at prestigious colleges or wherever those things kind of those kind of things happen in the future. I hope my real hope is that these are illustrations of what not to do.
Yeah. Absurdities. Yeah.
Of places where journalism kind of missed the mark. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
Anyhow, so on to something a little more substantive, I guess. This is from May 9th. This was put out. House Bill 594 in Missouri is a bill that passed and is heading to the governor's desk as of May 9th. I don't know if I actually did it or not, but whether or not it passes is not really my point. But it's eliminating capital gains tax.
Mm-hmm.
And when I saw this, I was thinking about the dichotomy, the difference between Missouri eliminating capital gains tax in a state like where you live, where they're just ramping up taxes more and more and more.
Exactly.
And it reminded me of, in the first book, The Fourth Turning, which you and I talk about a lot, Neil Howe and Bill Strauss talk about, in these very tumultuous, chaotic crisis eras, things happen that you wouldn't expect to happen, like succession, like states seceding.
Sure.
And I don't think you and I have talked about that a whole lot, but it does feel to me like there are pockets of states that are going in very, very different directions. What do you think? Is it, I mean, and again, one of the things you and I talk about, we kind of ingest, say a lot of times is, yeah, they wouldn't do that.
Right.
Right. But so part of me is like, that's just such a part of my bias. Like, well, they wouldn't do that. No, I mean, Washington, Oregon, and California are going to secede from the Union. Like that's never going to happen. But these kinds of things do happen in these eras.
Yeah.
And there is such a stark difference between how states like those three I just named are operating and other states that are much more conservative. What do you think, Dave?
Well, I think if there's a sufficiently impactful event of some sort that not the crisis event we're talking about that plunges the entire society into its kind of crisis era, existential crisis, but if there's that could be part of it too, but if there is a substantial enough crisis event, or with the federal government versus California, Oregon, and Washington in some fashion, if it raises that bar high enough, I could see it happening. I could see it, but it would have to be something that is so dramatic that they would say, well, we have no choice. It's a matter of human dignity, and we're and they would have to be able to rile everybody up so much that they'll accept that, and and of course that could bring on the countrywide existential crisis event as well, because it did last time.
so the typical issues that have been dividing our society are climate change, immigration / racism / I kind of put everything in like that bucket, right?
Gender ideology,
kind of, sort of, like how much of the person's income should the government take versus not take. I think that but out of all of those, I would think immigration would be the one, the leading contender of like what could lead to something like where a state just saying, you know what, we just can't get on board with what you're thinking, we're out of here. Anything else come to mind for you as
Well,
what could be the trigger issue?
I think categorically it would have to be a social issue. I don't think it could be something like taxes, like, okay, you've got an income tax, we don't have an income, all that. I don't think it could be something like, I think it would have to be a social issue, because in order for something like that to really take root and for politicians to run with it and make their speeches, it's got to be something so emotionally intense that it would engender that. And I don't think you're going to get there so much around money and around, fiscal policy and that type of stuff. You could get there around, gender ideology, around race. I could see those
Yeah.
things. And immigration, immigration plays into race based on the fact that, one side says no, it's a legal issue. The other side says no, it's just, like brown people issue. So, it could get
Yeah.
into that kind of scenario. But I think it would have to be a social issue, because the amount of intensity around a change like that would have to be super high, and I just don't think you're going to get people excited about taxes and that type of stuff as much.
Yeah, I think the only thing, a part of what you said that I might disagree with, is if they were able to turn the fiscal part into a federal government versus states governments rights kind of a thing. So, for example,
Yeah.
you know, California is alone, is, if it was its own country, be the world's sixth largest economy.
Yeah. Right.
It's
Huge.
massive, right? They can afford to, have their own navy probably. They can afford to do all that stuff
Yeah.
probably. I mean, they just raise taxes more, which they're clearly not
Which they're doing
opposed to.
anyway.
But one of the things that it seems to me like, and you would know this better than me, so I want to run this by and see if this makes sense. Seems to me that California specifically has a history of taxing people up what I would consider like almost absurd levels.
Yeah.
If you figure in the federal taxes and the state taxes and the county and city taxes, all that stuff, some people are paying well over half of the, when I say some
Yeah.
people, I don't mean just ultra billionaires and ultra millionaires. I mean people making $300,000 a year
Sure.
are paying over half their income in taxes.
Right.
That seems a little crazy to me,
Yeah.
right? At the same time, there are regulations and restrictions for building and things like that. The red tape, the bureaucracies are so inefficient that the federal government oftentimes has to bail California out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I could see a situation where Trump in office specifically, because now he's the boogeyman, right? So he's
Yep.
he's the bad guy. If something happened and California needed bailed out, and Trump said no, I can see them saying, "Well, what's the point of us being here?" Like this, you see what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
it's kind of a fiscal thing, but it's also kind of a state versus federal government. Like we're not on the same team, kind of a thing. I think they could probably, with a little bit of effort, twist that into a they're gunning for us kind of a thing,
Well,
and
yeah, that's what they'd have to do. They'd have to twist it into into something of a social bent, because I don't the people that are going to get out on the streets and protest and scream and yell and put up signs aren't going to talk about federalism and aren't going to talk about states' rights, and I mean they
yeah,
don't have a they don't know that we're not one country, but we're 50 states and all. I
right,
mean.
right, right.
I don't think there's enough intellectual prowess there to do that. But I think if you can spin that into, they're coming for you, they're coming for your kids, they're coming for
If
brown
your kid
people.
wants to be 7 years old in transition, the federal government
Right.
shouldn't have a right to say no. If San Francisco wants to be a sanctuary city, the federal government shouldn't have a right to say that.
Yeah.
If the federal government's not going to help us when we need some financial help, like what I can see them wrapping all that into a tiny
Yeah.
little package and be like, why bother?
Yeah.
I don't just stretch too much to see that as a reality.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think they would spin it into the top emotional issues. They would spin it into race, gender, fairness, all
Right.
that kind of stuff. They'd have a tough time.
Immigration.
Yeah,
If we want
immigration.
to, we believe that undocumented immigrants are the future of our economy, and the
Right.
government's trying to hold us back. Like, I could see him. I could see him putting that spin on every one of those topics. Climate
Yeah,
change.
for sure.
They want us to continue polluting, and we don't want to. I could see every one of those issues being spun into
Sure.
a federal government versus state thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what would cause something like that to happen. And it would be, and given the size of California in particular, that would be a very, and, the feds are not going to easily let that money
Right.
pot go from, that wouldn't happen. So, yeah, I could see that being a trigger that would cause the literal existential crisis.
Okay, so let's say we take the extreme off the table, and like there's no succession in the next 500 years or whatever. Even if we take that off the table, I don't think you and I have spent much time talking about the very different direction states are going.
Right.
Like at the same time, states like California, Washington, Oregon is kind of, I don't hear much national news about their,
Right.
they kind of repealed that there's no such thing as an illegal drug kind of a thing.
Right. Yeah.
They kind of quietly got rid of that,
They
I
did.
think last year.
Yeah.
Before that though, they were right there in the lead with California, Oregon,
Yeah.
and or Washington, and Illinois and New York and Delaware, and the there's like these pockets of states, but we're drifting in very polarizing directions, and
Right.
so it's frightening because the magnitude of it. So again, as I said, when we first started doing this, my belief is there's only three ways this crisis unfolds. One is some kind of civil war, whatever that looks
Right.
like, states seceding, whatever that would look like. An external threat, China bombs Pearl Harbor, or a collective uprising against the government. It seems like
Yeah.
those are the only three plausible ways this crisis
Right.
can unfold. If we don't have the internal thing, the Civil War-ish version of that,
Right.
given how far we're drifting apart, the magnitude of the external threat would have to be such unthinkable,
Yeah.
magnitude. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Am I making sense there? Like
No,
the
totally.
thing that would be so big that would unite these states going in completely opposite directions would have to be just unthinkably large.
Yeah.
The risk.
Well, so here's yes, I agree with that, with one caveat to it, and that is that the relative importance that we place on certain things these days, like the relative importance of climate change as a social issue, has dropped off dramatically.
Right.
In a few years back, it's like 50% of people under the age of 30 were experiencing anxiety and needed to get out of van because they thought the world's going to end day after tomorrow because AOC told them it was. That type. So I do think that some of those what's a large issue today in light of a massive, the Pearl Harbor attack. I mean, we had serious social upheaval in the 1920s, just like we have in the 2020s, right? There was serious social upheaval. There was, you had there was a real fascist movement. There was a real communist movement. They were and that all just poof, it just vanished when that got cut through. So I think that's true. I think what you're saying is true, with the caveat that sometimes these things that are so big today, tomorrow you look and like, where are all the people that were out in the street? They're gone now.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100% that we in this, well, not today so much because unemployment is up and people are stretched financially and things like that. I would say up to 2020, I'd say up to a year ago, I'd say up to second quarter 2024, we had the luxury of having the ability to worry about those kinds of things.
Yes, exactly.
And that as financial situations for many people have declined or worsened, we don't have the luxury to spend our energy on those kinds of things. Like when people go to Africa and talk to them about or whatever parts of the world and talk to them about climate change, there's pockets of the world where that's just not even on the radar. Like it's just not even it's just not even a thought. Now then there's other pockets of the world like New York City and San Francisco where that's all people think about. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, it's
because they have the luxury. They don't have any other problems. So that's the biggest problem they have to dwell on.
Right.
Where if you can't make your car payment and you're gonna lose your job if you don't have a car, that's obviously something what you're gonna dwell on, right?
Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So if you can't breathe, that nothing else in the world matters. If you can't eat and you don't have enough water, then very little matters other than that. So and that's also the case across the planet. There's plenty of people that they look at us and the things we worry about and say, "What the heck are you guys talking about?" I just want enough calories every day so my kid doesn't die. So
or they're content in their lifestyle. I mean,
oh sure,
like I've seen documentaries and movies and stuff where they go to places, parts of the world where they live not much different than the Plains Indians did 200 years ago, and they're happy. They don't want anything else. They don't want different. They you and I look at that like, how could you sleep in a hut like that? And they're like, what are you talking about? Why would you want anything different? Like, and arguably they're happier than me and you.
Yeah, no, well, and there you go. You've got more to lose, and so therefore you've got more to worry about. And the simple guy living in the mountains in Tibet someplace is like, yeah, good enough to eat, don't have to worry
My
about.
wife likes me, get along with my kids, I'm happy with them, I get to
Yeah.
watch my grandkids play. What more is there to life?
Right, exactly. Yeah. So I think I do think that I was going back to that sort of hierarchy of needs thing helps to define the ages that we're in and the passing of the one turning into the other turning,
Yeah,
and whatever you don't have leads you to want that more next time around. So the lack of organization, the lack of unity in the fourth turning leads to a high degree of unity and a high degree of organization during the first turning, that type of thing.
yeah,
So I think all those things based on the hierarchy of needs and what you've lost and what you've gained are the things that dictate where we go.
yeah. Yeah, and I think some of those issues, like the climate change is one that stands out as being one that, like, that one would quickly evaporate.
Yeah.
Other things, abortion and, like, when is that okay and when is it not okay? I mean, that issue's been around for
Yeah.
70 years now or whatever. I don't know if that's ever going anywhere.
Well, I don't think
If you could
there's some of
figure out how
these
to solve
issues.
immigration, you'd be a multi-billionaire. I don't know if that's ever going away. I mean, there's
Right.
always be some kind of version of controversy around some of those things.
And I think I don't think necessarily the issues go away, but I think they subside in terms of the loudness of the society on that particular issue. So
Yeah.
I think there's our FDR wanted to do all sorts of and try to do all sorts of crazy things from a federal perspective, stacking the court and just I mean just all sorts of things, and and when he became a wartime president. Instead of that, I don't think those impulses and the ideological motivation of him and his cohort changed. I just think that they were too busy on other things to really worry too much about it for the time being. And so
Yeah.
that's I think what happens in these crisis eras.
Yeah. No, I think that's definitely true. It is striking at how far apart the states are going. I
Oh
mean,
yeah,
there's very few things that I mean, you basically have red and blue states, and you got a mixture of purple states. I mean, that's
yeah.
kind of the cohort we have. The red and blue states are drifting further apart, and the purple states are just kind of changing their shade of purple. You know what I mean?
Well,
Um,
and the fascinating thing. So I do a lot of because I've got a lot of family in Texas. So I do a lot of kind of comparisons of Texas to Washington. And it's not just matters of degrees, it's matters of completely different priorities of focus. So like in Washington, as an example, healthcare costs and all of that, there's so much that's covered by the state that if you value that, then this is the place to be for that.
right.
States basically in Texas on the flip side, there's in the way that they run things down there is it's like do what you want, but there's not so much of a social safety net.
Yeah.
So
It's personal responsibility versus government obligation.
exactly, exactly. And then you look at the same thing in terms of like the tax structure of the both states, and say, well, technically speaking, the property tax rate in Texas is higher than it is in Washington State, but the property values are lower, so the actual tax bill. So
Yeah.
you start looking at the comparative priorities of these different places. And I do think if the comparative priorities drift far enough apart, then it's like, well, why are we even part of the same country?
Right.
I mean, at that point, why are we part of the same country? Just because we're connected? I mean, Europe's all connected. Maybe we can have, we've got small countries like, and some people have predicted that maybe the US ends up being more like Europe, a confederation of regional countries. That
Right.
hasn't really worked out so well for Europe in the last
Yeah. I
handful of years.
I would I certainly hope that's not the direction it goes.
Yeah.
Even again, I said this when Oregon passed their law basically legalizing all drugs. I think it's a crazy idea, but I'd like to live in a country where states can try crazy ideas. For
Yeah.
all I know, they have the solution. What the hell do I know about how to cure? If they don't have the ability to try something new,
Right.
then how can we ever improve?
Well, that was the point
Collectively.
of that was the point of the states being, that's the point of federalism.
Yeah.
A little bit of a weak federal government that does a few things,
Yep.
defends the country, regulates interstate commerce, few things, but let the states try different things, the laboratory of state democracies, and then see what works. The problem is, of course, that when when you do that and the states don't care, the ruling parties in the states don't care about whether it works or not, then you have a different problem on your hand. Like Washington State, in this state, we've decided over and over and over and over and over and over again that we want low cost car tabs, but the state. The even though the voters vote for it over and over again, the state legislature overrides them over and over and over again on issue
Right.
after issue after issue. So when
Yeah.
there's a decision to ignore democracy and to ignore the expressed will of the people, then the whole states as the sort of the laboratory of democracy kind of ends up failing, and that's what we've seen in a lot of these places.
Yeah, and I think that that is one of there's a handful of them. I think that's one of the fundamental differences in the states is how much control does the government get to have over your life?
Right,
You know, like you said in Texas, like do what you want to do. You're going to pay for it.
right, yeah,
That's the government not having a lot of influence on things in your having life. Like you want to go do the thing and you get hurt. Like okay, well you're on the hook to pay the doctor.
yeah, exactly.
Um, Washington's kind of the opposite thing. Like, well, yeah, we'll pay for the doctor, but also we're going to have this 700-page building code thing that makes the property values in Washington 50% higher than they are in Texas, which
Yeah,
has better climate and all that kind of stuff, right?
yeah, exactly.
So,
Yeah,
all right. Well, that was one thing. You and I had not spent a lot of time talking about that. I thought it was important to kind of explain. Because one of the things that gets lost in history because of World War II and the Depression is how much at odds we were on social issues back
yeah,
then. I mean, communism was on the rise in the 1930s like no other time in our country's history.
yeah,
And
exactly.
then, McCarthyism kind of was like the counterbalancing extreme. And then it kind of, I mean, when I was in school, communism was still taught as a bad thing. I
Right.
don't think that's the case anymore. But when I was in, junior high and high school, it was still taught as a bad thing. Um, and, but we're very much at odds state by state for sure,
Yeah.
and even within states, county by county in most cases.
Well, I think that's the bigger story there is if you look at a state like Washington, you've got a small concentration of one philosophy, and then
Yeah,
the people that are spread out across the geographic mass of the state think of it completely differently. And so
yeah,
so you do have, I think one of the great kind of arguments of the day is whether individual cities should control everything in an entire state or an entire country. I mean,
right,
if we didn't have the system that we have, you'd have like 6 cities in the entire United States controlling everything that happens in the entire country.
sure,
So,
yeah,
which is the founders, of course, knew there was a problem with that too. I mean, it's kind of basically back to the Hunger Games, and you've got the
yeah,
capital city, and then you've got what they called it the districts or something like that.
right,
The one place, tiny concentration, mass concentration of people that absolutely are, and so I mean, that's where you have the Greater Idaho movement in the up in the Northwest here, where
yeah,
the proposal is all of Eastern Washington, two-thirds of Oregon,
yeah,
all then begin to belong to this one big place called the Greater Idaho. I
yeah.
don't know that it's going to happen because I think the legal hurdles are really hard, but who knows?
I think that I agree that legal hurdles are substantial, and for those who don't know the geography there, so in Washington, for example, where I lived for 35 years, you got basically 5 counties out of, I don't know, what is it, 20, 25 counties,
Yeah,
probably 20 counties probably in Washington. You have 5 counties that have like 60% of the population
right.
between, Seattle, Tacoma, Everett, Spokane, and Vancouver down by Portland. Those are the big population centers. And you have
Right.
all this rural farming and logging and dairy and all these other much more fishing, much
Yep.
more rural counties, but they're just outnumbered, so they're just their voices just frankly aren't heard.
Right.
And I think they're going to have to sort that out, or there will be a Greater Idaho one way or another. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
No, I think
Like
that's true.
the legal obstacles might become secondary to the other obstacles of resistance if they don't get things figured out where they can at least, again, all the things we hear, like, speak power to truth to
Truth
power
to
and all that kind
power.
of stuff. Well, except for the rural farmer who lives in rural Washington and never gets to say because the people in Seattle are dictating how much water he gets for his horses,
Well,
and how
see,
many
that's
acres he
where
can have per horse.
And you see, that's where I think it could happen. So we're positing a scenario where the left says that we can't deal with federal government anymore. We just have to secede.
Right.
It's the flip side of that scenario is that Washington or California or somebody gets so draconian that people in rural places in smaller towns say, "Forget it, we're not doing anything you want," and then
Right.
the state then sends in the state patrol armed to the hilt,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
got a confrontation. I mean, that could push that same kind of envelope, that sort of like the Greater
Yeah,
Idaho
and
movement.
think about something like that. Like, well, I'll use Washington State again because I'm familiar with the area. You have the state patrol who goes into a place like Grant County.
Right,
The Grant County sheriff, though, whose obligations to the U.S. Constitution.
right.
So now you have the sheriff who's probably backing his constituents against the state patrol who's being backed by the state. Man, that gets pretty gnarly pretty fast.
Oh, it does, and those are the kinds of things where tempers flare, and those rural people all have guns, and so
Yeah, yeah.
and then you get the
Tempers flare and inadvertently shots are fired.
shots are
Somebody's gun
fired.
misfires, and like we got Fort Sumter all over again.
Yeah, well, and that's where you could end up having even a negotiated settlement. Say, well, yeah, you take all these Yahoo farmers and you can have them in your Idaho,
Yeah,
white supremacist, kind of.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, how they would end up spinning
Yeah,
that.
they would the people in the cities in Washington State would certainly spin it that way
Yeah,
if they could save face by say fine, you can have all those rubes and white
yeah,
supremacists and stuff like that. You can have all those. Yeah, I could totally see how
yeah.
that could happen. I don't think that's any less likely than a state like California saying that they're done. In fact, I think it's more likely. I think that there will be
Yeah.
some kind of redrawing of states unless we get back to kind of 1985-ish. Like, we can all disagree, and that's what's great about our country. If we can't get back to that, I don't think there's any
Oh,
alternative
we're
but,
not
but
gonna get. We're not
redrawing of
gonna
state
get.
lines.
Yeah, I have no hope that outside of the out, I have no hope that in the fourth turning time that we're in, that we're going to get back to a place where we can all just get along. The only way that's going to happen is, if a nuke falls, or Taiwan's invaded, or I mean,
Yeah,
or and I was thinking last week, there's this whole thing going on with Pakistan and India, two nuclear powers. So and my thought about that, well, first of all, it's like I hope nobody launches a nuke, because these things can get out of control really,
yeah,
really fast.
yeah,
Um, but my other thought about that is the scenarios that you and I have thought of, or that the super smart people like Neil Howe have thought of, about how the fourth turning could come about. It could come about in so many different ways. I mean, the crisis era
yeah.
I mean, you could see that conflagration between, Karachi and Mumbai, and both get blown off the map, and brings in the US, brings in China, and the whole thing. I mean, so there's 1,000 different ways it could go south. There could be a confrontation between the Philippines and with China, or who knows. There's just so many possibilities here.
Yeah, I
It
mean,
boggles the mind.
the big two obviously are economic collapse or some kind of
Oh,
huge
war.
war. Like
Yeah.
those are the two big ones,
Right.
and there's no shortage of opportunities for either or both of those, quite frankly, to happen. I mean, if you look globally, the possibilities for some stupid little thing to kick off a total war, like
Right.
there's ample little brush fires, let's say. And then economically, like, it was just 2 weeks ago, you and I were talking about how the tariff thing triggered all this huge thing, and now the stock market's up for the year, and like
Right.
that's
Right.
all gone, like it never happened. And but the economy is not any more stable or any more safe or any
Right.
more flourishing than it was 3 weeks ago. It's just that the stock market went up, and so the headlines changed.
Right, exactly. Well, and that's one of the things that makes predicting all of this really impossible, is because the stock market shouldn't be trading at the level it's trading at. It shouldn't. There's
Right.
no
Right. Yeah.
economic business
No.
reason. Who was it? There was software company Palantir. This is a little this is an interesting one. They're trading at 100 times their earnings. 100 times. You know.
So walk us through what that means. Like, if you were to want to buy stock in Palantir. What does that mean for the share buyback?
Yeah, what it means is based on the amount of money that they make, for me to get paid back on the stock that I don't own any because it's way too expensive.
Yeah.
For me to get paid back on the stock that I purchased would take a century. Would take a century for me to recoup my money because they take 100
if you were to recoup it just through the earnings,
through their earnings, just through their
yeah.
exactly. And so I mean, so the possibilities for things to go south economically are just as much now as they were when things were threatened by tariff supply chain things. So that could collapse.
This is another area that, again, you and I haven't spent a lot of time talking about this, but we're both intimately familiar with this, which is the appearance of how the economy is,
right?
Air quotes, like how it is on Wall Street versus how it is, again, air quotes, on Main Street,
right?
Are worlds apart. Like over the last year, small companies, as you know, because what you do for a living, and I know because what I do for a living, small companies, the demand for their services are down, 30%, 35%, probably, I would say, across, for most. There's exceptions, but most of them. Meanwhile, the second half of last year, the stock market hit a new high like every week. I think for like the second half of the year, it was like every week or every other week. Like it was insane pace. It was hitting all-time highs, which was nowhere near in alignment with how things are for regular, small businesses. Where you have 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 employees or something like that. It just completely disjointed from each other, like completely in different worlds.
Right.
But the headlines are always about Wall Street. The headlines are never about Main Street. Meanwhile, unemployment's trickling up and all these indicators are firing off about, hey, like we got problems coming, but the stock market's hitting all-time highs, so nobody pays attention to those warnings. And then someday, I don't know, 3 months from now, 6 months from now, 18 months from now, 3 years from now, whenever it happens, it's going to happen. I don't know when.
Yeah.
There's going to be a big correction, and everyone's going to say, oh, we're blindsided by Black Tuesday or whatever.
Yeah, exactly right. And it goes to the point, I think, that everything that's happening right now is to a great extent disconnected from reality. So the stock market used to be a pricing mechanism for the value of companies. It's like, how much is this company worth? Well, it's probably worth 15 times its earnings. If it's a really successful company, 20 times its earnings, whatever. So, you can see the logic behind that. When it becomes disconnected, anything that's disconnected from reality is in danger. So whether it's our foreign policy that's disconnected from reality, whether it's the economic policy through the stock market versus the average companies, people investing in things that they'll never get a return on. It's just not mathematically possible, but they're still doing it because everybody's doing it. It's all based on emotions, and that's what is the most fickle of all. Math is pretty stable. Emotions are not stable, and that's where we find ourselves.
The other thing that's interesting about that is all these, like, again, nobody cares about small companies, and I get that. Like my most of my career was in small companies. I worked for corporations for a couple stints. But nobody really cares about small companies, and I get that. I'm not complaining about that. But what's interesting is the Wall Street stuff. It's always fodder in the news for or against the other tribe, or for my tribe or against the other tribe. You know what I mean? Like when the big correction happened, I don't know, a month ago or whatever it was. Everyone's pointing the fingers at Trump. Well, the tariffs did this and the tariffs did that, and see what an idiot he is, and he thinks he's playing 4D chess, and he's really just a buffoon and all that kind of stuff. Well, now the stock market's up for the year, and there's no comment about that. But now the Trump people are saying, well, look how smart he is. And
Yeah.
and it's like, hey, you're all wrong. It's not, they're not necessarily, I mean, as I said before, I think things like tariffs can be the trigger, but they're not the reason.
No.
And the success that we're having right now, things that he's doing, the Japan or the China supposed deal, which was basically just a ceasefire on tariffs over the weekend. Well, that's the trigger, but that's not the reason.
Right.
The reason is because we're acting on greed, and people aren't buying things based on fundamentals. They're buying the thing today based on what they think the price is going to be of the stock in 2 weeks, not how sound the company is. It's all speculation. Well,
all speculation. Yeah.
Speculation always ends in one big catastrophe, i.e., 1929, 1964, 63, whatever it was, 74, 87, 2001, 2000. It's almost like you could say this is predictable if you look back in history at all.
It is, and it is very predictable. And I think one of the things Kenny G can realize in looking at our era and previous fourth turning eras is when the systems have all failed, when the systems have all failed to bring about a more just union, a more egalitarian society. When utopia has not manifested, despite the fact that we conquered the Nazism and went to the moon and did all these wonderful things, when all of that has failed to bring things about, then what you do is you turn to people and emotions and trends. So we turn to, who is our person? Is it Trump or is it burning AOC? You turn towards emotions. Well, the stock market's going up, so I better get on board. Fear of missing out, FOMO, right? I don't want to miss out. In marketing, it's like, no, you got to take it away from them. You got to say, here's the offer, but it's going away tomorrow. Oh my gosh, I got to invest in Nvidia and Palantir and Tesla, even though China's eating Tesla's lunch in terms of car production, et cetera. Where no, we got to invest, or Carvana, which is just a bizarre company. So we when systems and logic and formulas and all of that fail, then you look to things. What else do you have left? You only have left, the strongman personality that says, only I can solve this thing, or I'm going to get this done, tomorrow, and I'm the one that can do it, or our side's the only one. These other, and you get to demonization. The other side is not just mistaken on policy; they're evil. So you get into this emotionalism that literally runs everything, and that literally then is our undoing. So and that's why you look at throughout history these small events that have disproportionate impact. So the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand by this Serbian assassin, it should have we shouldn't know anything about, I shouldn't know Archduke Ferdinand's name, as even though I'm pretty decent with history, but I do, because basically that led to these two sides going at it, and this side joining that side, and this. I mean, it's a laughable escalation that caused World War One. I mean, you had these two great friends in the Kaiser and the Tsar. I mean, they were such good friends growing up and related. They were basically part of the same family, that they swapped their Kaiser and their Tsar uniforms and paraded around together and had. I mean, so how did that end up in destroying the Russian Empire and destroying the German and the Austro-Hungarian Empire?
If I remember right, wasn't there something with that, where that parade where he was assassinated took a wrong turn or something like that?
He took a wrong turn. He went down the wrong alley, and then you had World War One that was inevitable.
Had he stayed on the correct parade route, it wouldn't have happened. If I remember right,
Uber driver, if he had the right chariot Uber driver, history would have been totally different. But you know what the thing is, though, whenever there's a tinderbox, if
again, that was the trigger, but it wasn't the reason. If it wasn't that trigger, it would have been a different one.
It would have been a different one. And so, people, they do these thought experiments. If you could have gone back in time and killed Hitler as a baby, would it have been just, and it wouldn't have prevented World War II.
It would have manifested completely different. But again, it was the trigger, but not the reason. Yeah,
exactly.
Okay, one other thing that is a little more substantive than my silly little things we kick things off today. I saw this. This is from Matt Walsh, who I'm sure you know who he is.
Yeah.
And this is talking about there's a scuttlebutt I'll allow you to explain to folks, as you know this stuff way better than I do. But there's some South African people who are looking for I don't know if it's amnesty or I'm not asylum or whatever they're seeking. Asylum, not amnesty. Because the South African government has done some things that arguably put their lives in jeopardy, right?
Yes.
So, and then there's uproar about those South Africans coming here. They shouldn't come here. They should go back to where they came from, which is like Norway or whatever it was, or whatever countries that they come from. So the same people who are saying we need to have unlimited open immigration for people who don't come through normal channels are now also saying these people shouldn't be allowed. But do I have that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Okay. And so here's what Matt Walsh said. I thought this was kind of funny. So he says, remember, folks, white South Africans don't belong in South Africa even after 400 years, because they've been there for 400 years. They immigrated
in the 1600s. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So they don't belong in South Africa even after 400 years. White Americans are invaders in America even after 500 years. But the third world illegal immigrant who got here last Tuesday is just as American as anyone else. And if you call him an invader, you're a racist.
There you go. That's, yep.
And I thought, you know what, that is so spot on. That again, it's not about the situation; it's about the ideology and who you want. It's not principled. And it reminded me of this clip that I saw. I'm going to play this clip here. I saw this a while ago, and I honestly couldn't believe this when I saw this, that a leader of a nation would say something like this. So I'm going to share my screen and share this little 30-second clip here. And let's see here, guys. Share. I got to turn on. I got to click all the right buttons here.
Yep.
So I'm technically doing the right thing. So here is the leader of South Africa in an interview, and hear what he has to say.
Oh yes, yeah.
I don't know what's going to happen in the future. I'm saying to you, we've not called for the killing of white people, at least for now. I can't guarantee the future.
Yeah, but I mean, you'd understand somebody watching that, especially as it gets shared on Twitter, they freak out. It sounds like a genocidal.
Cry babies. Cry babies.
I'm not calling for the slaughter of white people, at least for now.
I can't give you a guarantee of the future, especially when things are going the way they are.
Subtext.
Especially if things are going the way they are, there will be a revolution in this country, I can tell you now.
Yeah. So this is the leader of the South African government saying, we're not calling for the killing of white people.
At least for now.
For now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, he's the one, I think it was like 2 years ago, they had a stadium full of people. It was a political rally, and he was speaking to them, and he started leading a chant of "Kill the Boers, kill the Boers."
Yeah.
And the Boers are, I mean, originally it was people from Northern Europe, Denmark, Holland, etc.
Holland, that's right. It wasn't Norway, like I said. It was Denmark and Holland, all that. Yeah.
Well, and then eventually, and became called the Boers, and then there was the Boer Wars in South Africa. But when the British found out they had lots of gold, so hey, let's take over that place. They got a lot of gold. So there's all that going on. But then the end result of that was that because of apartheid, then and apartheid going away, which thank God it did. It was horrible. It should never have a society like that.
Yep.
But now that's the justification for that kind of notion that you can kick somebody off that's been there for 8 or 10 generations of their land, or if they don't take it, you can be killed. Or I mean, they've essentially made the law as it is in South Africa now doesn't specifically say go kill white people, but it says that there are reasons that you might not want to prosecute that, for instance. And so I mean it's bizarre. I mean it's just totally.
And again, it goes back to, like you just said a couple minutes ago, like if you were looking at this about principles, like it doesn't make any sense. But it's not about principles. All the same reasons apartheid was bad, which it was, and I'm really glad it's gone.
Yes.
Are the same reasons this is bad.
Yes.
All we've done is change who the hero, the villain, the victim, and the scapegoat are.
Yep.
That's all we've done.
Yeah.
All we've done is taken those 4 roles and reassigned it to different groups of people.
Right.
And we're doing the exact same behavior.
Yep.
This group can't have property. This group can't have a say because of these characteristics that we've deemed it to be so.
Right.
It's the exact same behavior.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why when it all comes down to it, it's just about emotions and about tribalism. I mean, it's whatever you do to these people is fine because they mistreated us for 400 years. They own a disproportional. I mean, one of the things we hear about in this country is disparate impact, right? It's like the outcome of this person is worse than the outcome of this person, or this group is worse than this group. So therefore, whatever you do to the group that has the better lot in life is justified as a result of that. I mean, it makes no sense on the surface of it without further investigation to find out, is there really anything systemic about this? But it's just the natural way people are going to behave in their quest for justice, et cetera.
Well, and it comes down to, again, a couple fundamental things you and I've talked about a lot. All this comes down to control.
Yep.
People want power, control, which oftentimes they get through money and oftentimes they get through politics.
Right.
But they want power and control. And there's only 2 stories in humankind.
Yep.
Either we are so righteous and in our creator or our ideology that we are entitled to do whatever we want to that group, or that group was so harmful to us that we are entitled to do whatever we need to do in retribution.
Right.
That's the only two stories in humankind.
Yep.
And here it is playing out again. But the fascinating thing is, okay, let's say that you really did believe in immigration like we've had over the last, what is it, between 10 and 25 million are the number of people I've heard that have come across in the last, let's say, 5 years, right?
Yeah.
And 2% of those people have gotten work is a statistic I heard. The vast majority have not. They're getting one estimate was between $50,000 and $100,000 what it costs us per person.
Yeah.
In not just housing and food and like the EBT cards and cell phones and things like that, but also the administrative needs of facilitating moving them from this place to that place and getting them the funds and all that kind of stuff. So the estimates are between $50,000 and $100,000 per person. So if 10 million people came across and it costs $100,000 per person, that's $1 trillion. It's insane, right? Okay. Yeah. So if you're in favor of that, which I'm not, but if you were, how could you then say these people can't come? And, oh, by the way, if you're in favor of that, it's likely because the brown people have been mistreated and all that kind of stuff, and that's a big part of that argument. How could you then say these these couple hundred people or whatever, the number is very insignificant. Yeah. These people are not allowed to come. They should go back to Holland.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and it's all back to that colonialist model. So if you're part of a colonial power, you are de facto guilty. If you are part of a colonized group of people, whatever you do, we're gonna give you a little slide on. Hey, you're gonna kick off the farmers. You're gonna kill the farmers. Well, yeah, I understand because your grandparents and great grandparents, et cetera, didn't get to own land and they do. So it's all back to those narratives once again, and it's going to cause conflict. It's causing conflict. It's going to continue to cause conflict here, there, it's that same story that plays out over and over. It's that story I told you a long time ago about the fight that I almost got into in Macedonia with some Greek people. Yeah. Because the conflict between the two, and it doesn't even matter what you're arguing about. In that case, it was where Alexander the Great was born 2,500 years ago. In South Africa, it's, they're more substantial.
Well, in their defense, Dave, I still do lose a considerable amount of sleep wondering where Alexander the Great was born.
Yeah, well, if we could have a time machine, that's the first thing I'd test.
Well, it just seems to me that we're in an era where we're just looking for things to argue about.
Yeah, 100%. Well, and again, it's back to that idea that systems have all failed. Nobody trusts any of the systems. And so when that's the case, then all you've got left is your narrative. All you've got left is, who's bad because you're not bad. So somebody else is bad. So that's all you've got left. What's that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I say, of course I couldn't be bad. I mean, yeah. And again, it's similar to what we started out today talking about, which is all great ideas taken to their extreme are evil.
Yes,
exactly. I can't think of any exceptions to that. And this apartheid, this swing from apartheid, which was horrible, overcoming that was a fantastic, great idea.
Right.
I'm super happy it happened, and now it's been taken to the extreme, and now it's become evil.
Yes, exactly.
And I think that's maybe the thing that these fourth turnings instill upon us is a sense of balance.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes. I think it's kind of like the, in forests, you have to have periodically a forest fire to clean out the underbrush to preserve the health of the forest. The fourth turning, in my estimation, is kind of that societal forest fire that you need periodically. And it's painful. I mean, nobody wants to get burned. Yeah. It's not a fun experience to go through. But it's necessary for society to keep going. It burns off the underbrush. It cleans out the trash and destroys a lot of, the problem with the forest fire that cleans out the underbrush is it destroys a lot of good trees in the process. But nevertheless, that's what's required by, the way the universe is created to, reset us again. And we have to have a great reset periodically.
Yeah, if you were a theologian or religious type, you might say that this is what's talked about in the Bible.
100%.
You could make a pretty good argument that if you believe in God and you believe in the Bible, he said, like, well, I tried to give you this thing and you didn't want that, so you're going to have this alternative instead. And
exactly right.
It's kind of hard to. It's kind of hard to argue that, that that's what we're experiencing.
I bet that Noah and the flood and the ark happened in a fourth turning.
You should do some research on that and see if it happened to be some multiple of 87 years.
I'll see what I can sort out. Yeah.
All right. Well, as Dave mentioned in the opening, if there's things we're talking about that you think we're getting wrong as we're explaining what this time is like to future generations, or you think there's things that we said that we got especially right, we'd love to hear about it. Dave and I can only share our perspective. We'd love to hear yours too, to tell Kenny G and his ilk in the future what this crisis era is like, as they're undoubtedly look back and wonder what the hell we were thinking. And with that, this is Dave and Brian signing off.
See you next week.
Do you want to be Unsilent? Make your voice heard on our social media channels and share where you think we got it right or wrong. Go to unsilentpodcast.com for social links so you can join the discussion.